Today, we're diving deep into Papua New Guinea, a place where justice isn't just one single path. Nope. It's this constant, fascinating negotiation between two really powerful systems that exist at the same time: modern state law and ancient, deep-rooted custom. To even begin to get your head around Papua New Guinea, you have to understand just how incredibly diverse it is. I mean, think about this. We're talking about a country with over 850 distinct languages. And those aren't just dialects. They're completely unique languages, each one representing its own culture, its own community. It is, without a doubt, one of the most culturally diverse places on the entire planet. So that begs the question, right? With that much variety, how on earth do you create a single system of justice that works for everyone? Well, the thing is, in Papua New Guinea, they don't. Instead, you have this amazing example of what's called legal pluralism, where the formal state law works right alongside ancient custom. And they don't just sit side by side, they're constantly bumping up against each other, interacting and shaping one another. So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of this dual system. Then, we'll dig into the cultural foundations, the bedrock of customary justice. After that, we'll look at where these two worlds meet, and, where they sometimes clash. And finally, we're going to wrap it all up with some real, practical guidance for anyone who might be working in the region. All right, let's start with that big picture. You can think of Papua New Guinea's legal system as this constant tug-of-war. On one side, you have the state, which needs clear, uniform rules for individual justice, and on the other, you have the community, with its deep, powerful need for a justice that restores harmony for the entire group. And this isn't just some informal, unspoken agreement. The recognition of custom is literally written into the country's founding document. The Constitution itself says that development has to happen through Papua New Guinean ways. That gives customary law this incredible official standing right at the heart of the national identity. So, if custom is so important that it's in the Constitution, what's it actually built on? Well, to really get customary justice, you have to look at what you might call the invisible architecture of the society. These core cultural ideas that shape, well, pretty much everything. First up is this idea of one-talkism. It literally comes from the phrase one talk, which means people who speak the same language. It's this powerful web of obligations you have to one another. Your one talk, they're your people, your family, your clan, your community. You've got their back, and they've got yours. It's this incredible social safety net, and it creates a really collective way of looking at the world. And then there's big manism. Now, this is really interesting because unlike a lot of cultures where leadership is inherited, passed down through family, a big man in Papua New Guinea earns their status. It's all about what you can do. It's achieved through your skills, being a great speaker, a savvy negotiator, and knowing how to strategically share wealth to build a network of influence. So when you put these ideas together, you get a justice system with a completely different goal than a lot of Western courts. The number one aim isn't to punish some individual. It's to restore harmony to the whole group. Justice means fixing relationships, and that often happens through things like compensation payments. Responsibility isn't just on one person, it's collective. And all of this is woven together with deeply held spiritual beliefs. Okay, so what happens when this ancient, community-based system smacks right into the modern legal state? Well, you get this amazing, messy, and fascinating mix of hybrid courts, parallel systems, and, some pretty serious points of tension. The village court is the perfect example of this. On the outside, it's a formal, state-approved institution. It looks like a court. But its main purpose, written right into the law, is to achieve that customary goal of compromise and reconciliation. It is the ultimate blend of these two worlds. And get this, here's a brilliant example of how it works. A study of one village court found that the magistrates would deliberately avoid making a final ruling. They'd never issue a firm order. Why? It was a strategy to basically force the responsibility for finding a solution back onto the community, pushing them into that traditional negotiation to find a settlement that everyone could actually live with. Pretty clever, right? But of course, this interaction isn't always so neat and tidy. Those same principles that bind communities together can cause huge problems in modern society. The deep loyalty of Wantukism, well, that can look a lot like nepotism or cronyism. The influence of bigmanism can get tangled up with corruption and personal gain. And, most seriously, customary beliefs around sorcery can lead to absolutely horrific violence, creating a major clash with state law and basic human rights. And if you really want to see the difference starkly, this slide just lays it all out. In Papua New Guinea, the goal is harmony for the group. In a Western model, it's usually an efficient settlement for individuals. In PNG, the mediator is this active, respected figure from the community. In the West, they're a neutral third party.
The process itself is public and flexible in PNG versus private and structured in the West. And the outcome, a community-approved consensus versus a private, legally binding contract. They're just fundamentally different philosophies.
So, with all these massive differences, what in the world does this mean for someone actually trying to mediate a conflict in Papua New Guinea? Well, this final section is all about turning this analysis into a practical guide.
Look, the most important thing is you can't just parachute in with a rigid foreign playbook. First, you've got to embrace a hybrid approach that mixes different methods. Second, you have to figure out who the key influencers are, the elders, the community leaders, and get them involved. Third, you've got to prioritize understanding the relationships between everybody. And fourth, always look past the surface issue and focus on the real underlying interests that are driving the conflict.
And this is so much more than just being culturally sensitive. As the source material puts it so powerfully, forcing a foreign process on people can be seen as an act of ontological violence. That's an attack on their very way of seeing and being in the world. It's not just going to fail, it can actually do real harm.
So let's just boil it down to the absolute must-knows. First, any agreement depends on getting a consensus from the whole family or clan, not just the two people in the room. Second, you have to understand that something like a sorcery accusation might not really be about sorcery at all. It could be a stand-in for a land dispute or some other long-running issue. And finally, remember that the agreement you reach in a formal mediation, that's not the end. It's really just a proposal that the community is then going to debate, maybe change, and hopefully finally approve.
At the end of the day, it all comes down to this. If you're a mediator, a lawyer, any kind of professional working in Papua New Guinea, your most important tools aren't going to be your legal textbooks or your mediation models, they're going to be humility and adaptability.
And that leaves us all with a pretty profound question to think about. What's happening in Papua New Guinea is really a snapshot of a global challenge. In a world full of diverse cultures but increasingly standardized laws, how does our very idea of justice need to change to honor both the laws of a nation and the ancient wisdom of its people?